week and a half ago, everybody was crowning Anthony Edwards as the next Michael Jordan. He was going to be the face of the league, 22 years old, this incredible talent. And quietly, he's been kind of bad for a handful of playoff games in a row now. Like, with a few exceptions, he's basically at a series worth of games that just weren't very good. And to be clear, I'm not hating on Anthony Edwards. I love Anthony Edwards. I still think he's going to be an awesome player, but it's worth evaluating, like, hey, how did we go from this guy's the next Michael Jordan to him kind of no-showing in a couple of these games? Now, to be clear, and this is something that's really important when you're comparing Anthony Edwards to some of the other stars around the league, no-showing is kind of a strong term, right? Because offensively, you can look at the box score and say, man, Anthony Edwards didn't have a particularly good game. But specifically in the postseason, Anthony Edwards holds a lot of responsibility defensively as well, certainly in comparison to some of his peers, some of the other guys around the league that are asked to score a ton of points, facilitate a lot for their teams. They're not being asked to guard the way that he is. He's a really, really good defender, and he's more of a two-way player than just this, dynamic scorer, despite how good he is offensively. And certainly that's going to take a lot of the energy, a lot of the effort away from what he can do on the offensive end in terms of his explosiveness. And I think we've seen that in some of these games, especially game one against Dallas. He just looked a little tired at the end of the game. I mean, there are times where he comes right back in the game, puts in so much energy and effort on both ends of the floor, and just looks a little bit gassed, and that's going to affect his shooting. It's going to affect his efficiency. It's going to affect how much impact he's really going to be able to have offensively. But I think that's just a small part of what's happening here. There's two other big things for me. First and foremost, the amount of perimeter creation on this Timberwolves team is lacking in comparison to a lot of the other teams, certainly remaining in the playoffs and really amongst playoff teams, amongst good teams in the NBA. Minnesota has a shockingly low amount of perimeter creation for guys outside of Anthony Edwards. You might be thinking, oh, well, they have Cat. They can feed him in the post. He can create offense. Yes. They also have Mike Conley, but they don't have that other perimeter star. They don't have that other guy that they can, let create a couple possessions in a row to let Ant get a rest or let Ant get some easy looks. Like, if they're setting a ball screen for somebody at the top, yes, Mike Conley is good, but he's not on the level of, some of these other explosive, sidekick scores that some of these other stars have. And what that allows these teams to do defensively is they don't have to be concerned about literally anybody else making a play, with the exception of Cat getting in the post or driving off a closeout. They're not particularly concerned about anyone creating anything, getting to the rim, beating them in a ball screen action. And that just allows them to put a different kind of defensive pressure on Anthony Edwards, because even if they had guys that were better at attacking closeouts and dealing with an advantage situation, even if they had those kinds of guys, it would make things so much easier for him. But even as good as, McDaniels was in game one, as good as Cat has been at times in this postseason, they don't have a lot of Anthony Edwards kicks it out, makes quick decisions, and then they can go and play off of that. A lot of it is he creates, he drives, he kicks, and then guys shoot, or they give the ball to Cat in the post. And it's so much pressure for a guy that is still learning a lot of, his playmaking responsibilities, still learning a lot about what it means to be the main guy and be the main creator. And the environment offensively, although at times the spacing can be really good, they get up a ton of threes. Cat is the best three-point shooter in the playoffs statistically so far, and of course can do some things offensively. The environment around Anthony Edwards, offensively at least, isn't actually particularly great, which of course is going to lead to some struggles. The other thing that's happening here is when you think specifically about the units that Minnesota puts out there to start and end games, it's very easy for their spacing to quickly become Anthony Edwards, Karl Anthony Towns, and that's it. McDaniels can have off shooting nights, Mike Conley can have off shooting nights. We know Gobert isn't going to space. And suddenly it just becomes, okay, we have to worry about two guys outside of the arc. And that's basically it. Yes, Naz Reid comes off the bench, can shoot a little bit, depending on Alexander Walker, how he's feeling on a given night, although he hasn't been shooting the ball well at all lately. Kyle Anderson's release is too slow for anybody to be remotely concerned about what he's going to do from three. And so generally speaking, I think that's what's happening with Anthony Edwards. He's not playing particularly well. Sometimes there's some mistakes he makes in terms of turnovers, but he still creates a lot for Minnesota because they don't really have a choice. And not to make excuses for the guy, but he is 22 and he is still trying to figure it out. And we did put a lot of expectations on him in a very short time span. And he just hasn't responded to it particularly well, but also I don't think the environment is super well set up for Anthony Edwards to be successful compared to some of these other stars, at least on the offensive end of the floor. The other thing that's happening here that absolutely is affecting this is, in addition to being tired, maybe some of the spacing not being ideal, I think there's probably a little bit of an injury thing going on. There are just times where he's messing with his knee or his calf or something in his lower body. And for a guy that relies so much on his explosiveness, getting to the rim, getting out in transition, it's concerning when you see a stat line like you did in game one, where Anthony Edwards made 1 2-point basket and it was a mid-range jumper. He didn't make a single shot at the rim all game in game one. And when you start to see stuff like that and you start to see the 3-point volume go up, you start to think that maybe this is a guy that's a little bit tired and maybe is dealing with some kind of an injury as well. Now, I think one thing we've learned, though, throughout the postseason is to not doubt Anthony Edwards. Like, if he feels like he has it on a given night, he's going to go for it, and he's really going to try and put the team on his back. And the other thing is Minnesota, despite some of the struggles from Ant, has still managed to win a lot of these games. From a shooting perspective, Ant was not good in Game 7 against Denver. He's 6 for 24, and Minnesota still went on the road, was down 20 in the third quarter, and won the game. Like, I think that's one of the nice things about the way Minnesota is set up, is that, yes, maybe offensively it can be a little bit difficult for Ant because of the responsibility and maybe some limited spacing at times, but they've got everything else figured out. Like, they are able to still make some of these games work and still play really well because they're so good defensively and because their size can overwhelm teams in certain matchups. And so, yes, it's okay to recognize that Ant hasn't been very good in like 4 of the last 6 playoff games, but it's also okay to recognize that he's 22. There's all these other factors that may be impacting that. And the Minnesota is constructed in a way that they don't necessarily need superhuman performances from Ant in order to win these games. And especially moving forward in this Dallas series, I'm really interested to see how he can kind of manage the way that he's been playing in these last handful of games against a Dallas team that has about as much to throw at him defensively as any team other than literally his own team in Minnesota. They have so much length, they have so much size, they have so much versatility, they have a ton of different guys they can put on him, and he's already said himself, like, he's going to guard Kyrie, so he's going to have an insane defensive responsibility as well. And it's distinctly possible that we're just putting too much on the guy, that we're trying to give him too much, whether it be Minnesota trying to make him, be too much of a two-way player, or we're putting these crazy expectations on him too early. And I know it sounds like I'm just making excuses for him, but I'm just trying to figure out, like, what's happening. Like, how can he go from looking as incredible as he did at the beginning of the postseason to where he's been at the last handful of games? And I think the teams are just getting more difficult. The teams are getting better defensively. Teams are realizing more as a series goes on what they can do to try and stop him. And he still had some incredible individual games, but the game-to-game consistency, especially from a scoring perspective, could maybe be viewed as a little bit concerning in certain ways. So what's wrong with Anthony Edwards? Nothing really. Like, there's some factors that go into it, and quite frankly, I'm not really concerned about what he's going to look like, whether it be this postseason or moving forward in the future. He's going to figure it out. They're going to get a little bit better spacing around him. He's going to, maybe get in a little bit better shape next year. I'm not worried about it at all. I don't have any concerns about Anthony Edwards as a playoff contributor moving forward. It's just in this particular postseason against this particular Dallas team, I don't know that we're going to see some of those scoring numbers that we saw in some of the really good games he had at the beginning of the postseason. We'll see, but this is a really, really tough challenge for Ant. I think we're seeing that in the numbers right now. In terms of adjustments for him, what I would like to see is I'd like to see him just get to the rim more, even if it doesn't result in a basket, even if he doesn't get fouled or whatever the case may be. Just put a little bit more pressure on the rim if you're him. And yes, they're specifically Dallas, they're collapsing on him. They're trying to make sure that he's a playmaker and not someone that's getting all the way to the rim. And Dallas has all this size, absolutely. I don't want him to force it. I don't want to have him, start turning the ball over. But I think Dallas is okay if Ant shoots 12 threes in a game. Like, the way that they're guarding him in these ball screens, I think they're okay if Anthony Edwards is just someone that's pulling up with jump shots. And so I don't know if it's, not healthy, whatever the case may be, being tired. Get to the rim more. I know it's easier said than done, but to me, that's the big adjustment. And if you come back to this video a couple of days from now, a week from now, and Ant had like a 40-point game, I'd have to imagine a good amount of that is because of either getting to the rim or free throws.